This podcast is recorded on stolen and unceded Aboriginal land.
We acknowledge the First Nations and elders of this country and join their calls for justice. Always was, always will be Aboriginal land.
All right, Mike the Griff Griffin, what do you think of this video? Listen carefully.
Okay.
G'day, Tasmanians. It's Senator Jackie Lambie here. As the federal election gets closer, let's get serious. I want to make a pledge to the people of Tasmania that if re-elected, I will fight tooth and nail to move the national capital from Canberra to Tassie, where it bloody well belongs.
Thoughts?
That must be a deep fake because she didn't flip-flop halfway through, you know. She didn't sort of sell out her beliefs or...
Be nice to Jackie. No. Is she, so this is the ABC. They have released 2 deep fakes. I'll play the other one soon and see if you recognize who it is. But, initially... I thought, no, it's just not quite on point. It doesn't quite sound like her, and I don't quite know what's missing. But then I don't know if I hadn't clicked on the article knowing it was a deep fake, if I would have known.
Well, hold on. Can we play that again? Let me have a listen.
Yeah, I'll play it again.
G'day, Tasmanians. It's Senator Jackie Lambie here. As the federal election gets closer, let's get serious. I want to make a pledge to the people of Tasmania that if re-elected, I will fight tooth and nail to move the national capital from Canberra to Tassie, where it bloody well belongs.
Well, yeah, I mean, if that was like one of those auto phone dialers, you probably wouldn't question it. It's sounds like she's reading and a bit like it sounds like it's a bad ad read, and that sounds like AI, I guess. Deepfake is like a bad ad read.
I guess so. Yeah, because to me, it's like there is some sort of Jackie Lambie emotion missing from it, even though it does. You can hear it replicating emotion when she's like, get on with, no tooth and nail, but there's just some sort of soul missing. Interestingly, they went and showed this to people on the street and someone was like, well, I knew it was wrong because she wouldn't say move the capital because they basically were saying you'll navigate AI not necessarily on the quality of the AI itself, but on the content, which is probably true. You could kind of tell that it's not quite her. But okay, I have one more. Do you want to close your eyes? I'll scroll and play it and you tell me if you know who this is.
Sure. Okay. Yep.
Yep. You're not looking at the screen. All right.
Okay. So I'm not watching. Yeah. Video viewers can confirm that I'm looking away. Yeah.
Okay. Ready.
Yeah.
Well, our position is, and it's a position I had both as a state MP and now as a federal senator, that legalizing cannabis just is a major way of reducing harm.
Do you know who that is?
Is it an Australian politician?
It is. And they've given him this weird, slight American accent, but I can kind of understand why they would have done that because he does have a kind of bit of a twinge on his voice.
I think maybe I'm using context clues, but is that because of knowing, is it Nick McKim?
No.
No?
Close.
No. Who is it? It's
Male Greens MP.
David Shoebridge. Okay, well, in fairness, can I just say as a producer of a Greens podcast, I was thinking of David Shoebridge. I just got their names confused. Seeing his picture now, that's the person I was thinking of. Sorry, David and Nick.
They're miscellaneous upper house white Greens MP.
Oh, yeah. So, okay, so yes, I understand. Sorry, yes, they're different faces, different people. That wasn't great. I don't think they'd fed much data into it. They probably fed one of the 2 or 3 times they've had the Greens on.
Yeah, I don't know. Because it's funny you say that because I'm like, it is obviously not the voice is wrong in that it's quite American. But it does sound like David Shoebridge to me. I don't know.
I got it, and I got the vibe, the general near enough. So, do you know what the state is? Maybe the article says this. I haven't read it, but are you with the truth in advertising laws? So it seems like if you're a political party, you can basically just
do whatever,
lie completely. Are you allowed to use deepfakes as part of that permitted lying?
Yeah, I think you can. I think that's part of the argument for truth in political advertising laws. But when ABC did this, they were very clear that we got permission from these MPs to generate this and to use their likeness and stuff. And I don't know if maybe you could sue for using your likeness for something, but I think they used deepfakes of Stephen Miles in the Queensland state election, remember? So
that's true. They did. Yeah.
Yeah.
So could the Greens make a video being done, being I went to Epstein Island and that sort of stuff? Can you get defoed for this?
You could maybe get defoed. Yeah, potentially, if it was defamatory. But if it was just a deepfake to, I don't know, make them look bad.
And so every election that comes up, they say it's going to be the deepfake election.
Yeah. but people don't really do it.
It's been a while now. It's been a few elections, but like, I don't feel like it's ever been a deepfake election that I've seen, but do I just not get them, or do I see them and I don't realize?
I think we are yet to, like there's enough reality out there that the political parties are trying to use in their campaigns that they don't necessarily need to create deepfakes. But maybe, election hasn't even been called yet. So we'll see. There could be more deepfakes to come.
And of course, the audience, if I didn't realize, this whole segment is me as a deepfake. This is Tom here,
That's right. You got, you fools. You don't even know Mike the Griff.
You fucking media illiterate losers.
You idiots. You deserve everything that's coming to you.
Tom.
Talk about the Greens. That bunch of suited up, egg-sucking gutter trash.
If you want the dole for life, free marijuana, vote Greens.
The Greens Party is a party of hatred.
We're stuck with the hosts of Chapo Shithouse podcast.
Serious danger to Australia.
This is Serious Danger, a podcast about green politics in Australia. It's not an official Greens Party podcast. It's produced by Michael the Griff Griffin. And this week, Tom, it's his turn to take a little break. And so you've got Emerald Moon. I'm here recording on Yagara and Turrbal country in Mianjin, as always. But I've got a very special guest co-host with me. All the way from across on the other side of this great southern land is Gerard Mazza, who is a campaigner and writer taking on the gas industry in WA. Thanks for joining us, Maz.
No worries, Emerald. Thanks for having me here.
Yeah, good to have you. We wanted to talk about the oversized influence of the gas industry in WA, touch on the upcoming state election. That's next weekend. Polling's already started, I imagine, pre-poll. And then a little bit about kind of the implications that WA and what's happening there has for the rest of the country. Just quickly before we get into that, a quick shout out to our new patrons. We have people who have signed up as supporters on the Serious Danger Patreon. That helps pay Mike's wages, keeps the show going. It's $3 a month or whatever you want to pay. And we do an extra bonus episode every couple of weeks. We've been reading Paddy Manning's Inside the Greens. So got some exciting episodes coming out on that. Thanks to not Paul Murray. That's the name that they signed up under. Michael Warren, Joe Rowley, and Liam Hodges for joining and supporting the show. We also have a little mailbox. We have a message from one of our Patreon subscribers, long-term subscriber, Spirit of Anger and Hope, who says, hey, one of your listeners recently started volunteering with the Greens in Tasmania, so can you give a shout out to Nicola? And yes, we'll give a shout out to Nicola, because one of my favorite things is when people are like, I decided to actually go fucking door knocking from listening to your little podcast. Nicola, write in when you hit your first 100 meaningful conversations door knocking, and we'll give you another shout out. That's the Serious Danger promise. But yeah, definitely, like, we love to hear when people get involved more, start kind of doing on the ground stuff from listening to the podcast. So please write in. If you want to email us, we're hello@seriousdangerpod.com.
Gerard Mazza is also facing charges. He's Disrupt Burrup Hub's main strategist.
I think my suspicion is that they're going to just start opposing bail for us as a matter of, as the normal thing.
All right, that's housekeeping stuff. So, Gerard Mazza, can you give the listeners right up front a little bit of an intro to you, how you got involved in anti-gas campaigning and politics generally?
Sure. So I have worked with Disrupt Burrup Hub, various other climate campaign groups in WA. I kind of got involved. There was a big dispute in Western Australia over a highway, the Row 8 highway, back in like 2018. And that was kind of my introduction to, the environment movement here. And I remember like being there one day, and there was this plan to push over a fence. Everyone's like, okay, we all got to push over this fence together. So everyone's lining up. And then, the fence goes over so easily because there's like hundreds of people there. And I was like, oh, this is cool.
A little bit addictive.
It had like a little edge of danger to it. And then I used to be a school teacher. 2019, the school strike was happening, and I was like pretty inspired by what I was seeing with my students and stuff. And I was like, climate crisis, got to get amongst it. So, since then I've kind of been working on that. I've been doing a bit of writing, doing a little bit of podcasting, doing a little bit of TikToking. So,
Yeah.
That's
yeah.
me.
Cool. Yes, you have somewhat featured on the show before, and actually alongside a school striker. So you and was it 20-year-old Matilda, who was a school striker,
Indeed,
were arrested
yeah.
after the action outside Woodside CEO Meg O'Neill's home. This was back in August 2023. We on the podcast we spoke to Jessie Noakes. It was episode 87, if anyone's interested in going back and listening, but who's also involved in Disrupt Burrup Hub. You'd been doing, or that group had been doing a bunch of things like the Woodside logo spray painted on the Down on His Luck painting. There was this, I loved the non-toxic stink bomb that was designed to smell kind of like a gas leak inside Woodside headquarters. These really clever direct action protests. And then the one that, got massive media attention and was, I would say, very controversial as well, was a protest outside that home of Meg O'Neill, and the question of whether that was, intimidation and that sort of thing. So was it just you and Matilda that were arrested?
There were a heap of us in the end because so the ABC Four Corners were there on site and they had footage of us over, they filmed us for about 4 or 5 days. They ended up handing over the footage to the WA police.
Yeah. Thanks, ABC.
Not really the Four Corners. It was management who were responsible for that decision.
Mm-hmm.
So there ended up being, I think, 7 of us charged because they used that footage to charge various people. There are 4 of us who pleaded guilty and who just were sentenced over the last couple of weeks. So, I was sentenced earlier in the week. I copped a $3,500 fine. The 4 of us between us, we got $10,000 in fines from the WA Magistrates Court.
Okay.
Which, interestingly, is the exact same fine that the Magistrates Court gave Santos a couple of months ago, $10,000.
It's only fair, right?
Yeah.
Santos, they're just a little company.
Well, that's right. Yeah. So Santos had a massive oil spill off the coast of WA. A whistleblower revealed it. It killed a whole heap of marine life. There are at least 3 dolphins who were killed in that oil spill. But Santos were fined $10,000. So if my maths is correct, it's cheaper for Santos to kill a dolphin. It's about $3,300 per dolphin than it is for me to try and help someone with a protest that never actually happened at Meg O'Neill's house. So
extremely depressing maths. So what were you actually in the end charged and convicted for? What's the offence? Standing outside evil person's home?
Yeah, so the charge initially was conspiracy to commit an indictable offence, which is quite a serious charge, but that was downgraded to attempted trespass and attempted criminal damage. But there are shout out to Joe and Talia, who are 2 of our co-accused, who were like, no, we're going to plead not guilty. Their situation is a little bit different. So they're still going to face the larger charge in a trial later in the year.
Yeah. And this was one of those instances, right, where they put some pretty significant and restrictive bail conditions on a lot of the people involved, including restrictions on communications, which is a pattern over the last few years, using really, I would say, unreasonable bail conditions to kind of suppress peaceful protest. How did that end up playing out? Did those bail conditions stick or?
They stuck for a while. So, we all had non-association conditions, I think, for like a couple of months. And that was pretty hard because various kind of people who were caught up in that, like I had other professional reasons to communicate with or whatever, and personal reasons. So, that was challenging. But, eventually they kind of got the right magistrate and the magistrate dropped them and kept other conditions. I'm still under various conditions. I'm not allowed to go near any property owned by Woodside, which in WA is a challenge. But
that must be tricky. Interesting. Like how close, how close can you go to?
I think it's 100 metres. I think it's 100 metres. Yeah. But I did live up in the Pilbara previously, and in the Pilbara, Woodside owned like almost everything. So
can't drive down the road. I
couldn't go to take my plates back to the licensing office because it was across the road from Woodside. I don't want to get arrested. So
what's your take on, like, as someone who's been involved in this kind of direct action and very effective protest, what's your take on the way that different states and territories and governments across the country have been introducing laws to quote unquote crack down on this kind of direct action and protest?
Yeah, it's definitely an interesting one because in WA we actually haven't had the anti-protest laws come through. So often like the courts and the legal system in WA are not the ones repressing protests. It's more in the policing, and it's more in like the bail conditions and kind of just like the surveillance and those kind of things. I mean, look, you know, I think it's a really interesting one with direct action, because part of what you're doing is you're kind of intentionally transgressing, like you're crossing a line, and there's going to be some kind of consequences for that. And I mean, I do kind of think about, like, you know, the civil rights movement in the US, Martin Luther King, even though that's a very different situation, like part of what they were doing was they were intentionally bearing the legal costs.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, it has become outrageous. I mean, especially over East, people getting like sentenced to long jail sentences and whatnot. And, you know, as the climate crisis gets worse, as Australia's kind of inaction becomes more apparent, like, I guess it kind of makes sense that these structures will push back and will fight back and will find ways that they can. But I don't think in the long run, like, it's going to work for them. I think that it just kind of heightens the intensity and, builds that kind of conflict and tension. So,
that's right.
No, look, much respect to people. Like, I know people over East who've done prison time and whatnot. You know, I've done a couple of nights in the lockup, but I've never done a longer stint. So, a lot of people out there fighting the good fight.
Yeah, I mean, a few $1,000s, like, obviously it's not ideal for any normal person to have to pay, but I have to say it is a lot less severe than the kind of fines and jail time that's being threatened against protesters across the country.
I mean, that's kind of how I felt as well. It was less than what was expected. I mean, the other thing is, like, with us is that they always charge us, like my other charges that I'm on, they initially charged me with aggravated burglary, which is like a very serious charge for a kind of a stink bomb prank that, again, didn't actually happen. All of the ones that I'm involved with are the failed protests, but we still end up getting charged. But that charge has now been downgraded to a charge called doing an act to create a false belief, which I think is...
That's an offence? Doing an act to create a false belief?
Which, I mean, if that is an offence, you'd think that Woodside and the WA government would be on the hook for that one time and time again. But
every politician. Anyway. Well, so you've been doing, so you've been involved in Disrupt Burrup Hub. You've also got a bunch of other, pots on the stove. You semi-recently, or the last little bit, you've been doing this Big State project. Can you tell us what the go is with that?
Yeah, so Big State, it's largely a TikTok channel, and the idea is to kind of talk to people who might be kind of conspiratorially minded, or people who might have like a healthy kind of distrust for government, media, whatever, and present them with what is in fact the biggest conspiracy in Australia, which is the way that the gas industry is conspiring with media, with government to rip us all off. So that's kind of focused on the economic impacts of the gas industry, maybe trying to connect with like a slightly different audience. So that's on TikTok at Big State if you want to check that out. And then also kind of as you are, Emerald, exploring the kind of new media landscape, have a project called The Last Place on Earth, which is basically it came about because, WA is a one newspaper state. We've got the West Australian newspaper owned by Kerry Stokes, who's also got all kinds of gas interests. He also owns basically all the local papers, Channel 7. So there's a real kind of monopoly on the media there, and the West is basically like a pamphlet for the oil and gas industry. So Jesse Noakes, who you spoke about earlier, and we decided we wanted to kind of try our hand at our own little media project. So we do a podcast and we do a newsletter. So that's lastplaceonearth.com.au if people want to have a look at that.
I'll check out the website. I mean, it looked good. It says, kind of like there's opinion pieces and analysis and articles, and the podcast looked really interesting as well. I was looking at the TikTok for Big State, and to me, and this is a compliment for me because I was a big Chaser fan, like it had Big Chaser War and everything kind of vibes. Is that intentional?
That was definitely on the mood board. Okay.
Because it's kind of like, it's almost like little skits, and you're coming up to people like you gave me a little list where you were like, you said you've kind of harassed Albo, visited Burrup Hub, and pulled stunts at Mineral Resources. What's one that stands out as a bit of a fun little stunt that you did on that channel?
I mean, it was pretty fun. There was one day where I was hanging around Parliament House at the press conference, Roger Cook, the WA Premier's press conference, about they were bailing out the lithium industry. And like all his staffers clocked me. They were like, don't say anything. All the other the actual journos were like taking photos of me like, oh, this is going to pop up. And then there was a little bit of a gap. So I was like, I've got a question for the Premier. And then the security and the cops just kind of descended on me and carted me off. So that was kind of
You didn't even get to ask your question. What was your question going to be?
Well, I asked as I was yelling away, I was saying, are you going to approve the Northwest Shelf extension of the Burrup Hub, which they have since approved, which is disastrous for Aboriginal heritage, for climate, for WA's cost of living, etc. But that was my question. I mean, I also got to yell at he was yelling at ex-Premier Mark McGowan at the opening of the Metronet train. And McGowan's kind of gone into hiding a little bit since his sudden retirement. I mean, he's taken on, I think, 5 jobs with the resources industry. But
good.
I did.
He's looked after then. Good to know.
Yeah, he's definitely
Don't
looked
fear
after.
for his economic stability.
No, Mark McGowan, for a man who was exhausted and had to leave politics, he certainly kept himself busy. But not so much publicly. So it was kind of fun to catch up with McGowan. Yeah.
Well, but hang on. As someone who is a train lover, and I'm sure there are lots of train lovers listening, you would interrupt a train-related ceremony? That's
No. I didn't interrupt a ceremony. I just actually, they did a bait and switch because I was looking for Albo because Albo was on that train, the first train to Ellenbrook.
Okay.
But they got him off the previous stop. So I was looking around. There's no Albo. Oh, there's Mark McGowan. So
I'll take
I
him.
went and had a chat to him, about a deal he did with Kerry Stokes, actually, the owner of the West Australian, to export WA's onshore gas for the first time. That was a COVID-era thing. That's going through the Burrup Hub. There's this web in WA of relationships between, media and politicians, industry. I mean, as there is in the rest of the country, but I think it's particularly apparent here.
Yeah. Well, and as you say, I mean, I think there is something to talking to people who are maybe leaning towards conspiracy theory. Like they talk about this on podcasts like QAA that I listen to, that, there's this idea of the deep state, which is nonsense if you're just thinking about lizards and pedophiles and shit. But there is a kind of a real deep state that is this network of like capital and politicians and media. So in a sense, it is real. Yeah.
Yeah.
So the Northwest Shelf development, give me the rundown of that. That's kind of seems to be the most significant recent approval that is on the agenda for WA in the gas space.
Yeah, that's right. So the Northwest Shelf, what Woodside have done here is pretty interesting and tricky because there's the Burrup Hub and they've just carved it up into all these little bits and pieces and they're getting approval for them one by one. But the Northwest Shelf is kind of the piece that facilitates the rest of it, I guess. It's actually an existing project. So it was the first part of the Burrup Hub that was built in the 80s. Okay. When they built that involved the destruction of about 5,000 pieces of Aboriginal rock art up on the Burrup Peninsula.
Yeah.
So that was built in the 1980s. Its natural life is kind of about to finish. And so Woodside want to extend that for another about 50 years till 2070. So this is one big gas export facility. But it's kind of connected to everything else. So the Browse field, which Woodside are talking about getting up off the WA coast, would come through the Burrup Hub. They're looking at getting gas from the Kimberley, from fracking, and sending that through the Burrup Hub for export.
Yeah.
They're sending gas from the Perth Basin. All in all, if you look at all of these emissions together, it's about 6 billion tonnes of carbon emissions till 2070. It's kind of a huge project. It would involve further degradation of the Murujuga rock art, and it would also involve WA giving more of its gas for export, because in WA we've kind of managed to avoid some of the gas price pain that you guys have faced over east.
15% you've got of the reserve that has to be
So it's kind of complicated, but for the offshore gas, it's 15%.
Yeah.
The offshore producers haven't been meeting that 15%, and that's something that the Dom Gas Alliance in WA has been pushing for. But for onshore gas, previously it was 100% of onshore gas. Mark McGowan gave that exemption I was talking about earlier to Kerry Stokes in the COVID era, so that kind of kicked it off. Premier Roger Cook recently gave away 20% of that onshore gas is now allowed to be exported.
Right.
And the problem with the Northwest Shelf is that the export capacity is so huge. Woodside are running out of their own gas offshore, so they don't have the capacity to fill it. And so they're going to be looking for onshore gas to fill it.
Yeah,
and they're going to be kind of processing gas, that they are looking at the Kimberley, which has never been fracked before, fracking that and bringing that in. So I guess one of the worries about the Northwest Shelf is that it's undermining that DOM gas policy, which has been so effective in WA and kept our gas prices low. But yeah, I mean, there are obviously all kinds of other concerns. The climate concern is, the huge one and the primary one, and as is the Aboriginal cultural heritage concerns.
Yeah. And so to clarify, so the Northwest Shelf development itself is purely, that's an export facility as opposed to an extraction development.
It's both. It has been an extraction development, but those are running dry. And so it's kind of expanding into this third-party tolling facility. Yeah,
and would kind of then drive demand for further extraction elsewhere.
That's right.
Yeah, gotcha.
Yeah.
Sounds pretty cooked.
Yeah, it is cooked. It's massively cooked. So the WA government approved it just before Christmas. It's now with the federal government. So Tanya Plibersek has extended her kind of deadline out until towards the end of March. So given that there's obviously a federal election looming, it looks like that decision probably won't get made before the election. But there's been a bit of tension between the WA government and Plibersek over this. The WA government kind of pushing her to make a decision. When she delayed it, Rhys Whitby, WA's Environment Minister, he said that there was a nerdy little bureaucrat somewhere in Canberra who was messing with Woodside's expansion plans, and he didn't like that. But the other thing here is that the WA government didn't actually provide all the paperwork to the federal government, including a report on the Murujuga rock art, which was meant to be publicly released towards the end of last year. WA government haven't released it. They were slow to give it to Plibersek. Plibersek's now got it off them.
Because maybe it doesn't say what they would like it to.
That's what all signs are pointing towards, that it's kind of, it's showing that there is this significant impact on this cultural heritage. So, but I mean, you've kind of got a situation, I guess, similar with the nature laws where you've got the WA government and industry on one side and then putting pressure on Plibersek. It'll be interesting to see how this goes compared to that. But
I know. Well, that's what I was going to say. I mean, for me, it is another example as well of you can have someone who maybe is trying to do good things, and even when they're in a very senior position within the Labor Party, still at the whim of the industry and, the right of the party as well. Like what happened with Plibersek being overridden on those nature laws was pretty blatant what went on there.
Yeah.
And will the same thing happen here, that even if, someone's in the Labor Party thinking they can change from within and make a difference, they can be the environment minister and still not be able to achieve that outcome because the institution is just not on that side.
I think it would just be such a depressing situation to be in, to be like, I just cannot do my job because there's so much pressure coming at me from industry.
Yeah.
I mean, there's sometimes, like we talk about it, the Last Place on Earth, there's like this simplified version of the dynamic, which is basically like the resources industry uses the West Australian newspaper to tell the West Australian government what to do and all their backdoor channels. And then the West Australian government tells the federal government what to do. Like that seems to be the kind of basic dynamic with the nature laws. This Northwest Shelf thing is kind of maybe turning out similarly. There's been a pretty big beat up in the Australian this week about how if there's a minority Labor government, that the Greens and the Teals will hold Australia hostage over the Northwest Shelf and use it as a bargaining chip and whatnot. So
fuck yeah, okay. A powerful crossbench, Sometimes they're powerful and they can do shit, and sometimes they won't have any power, and that's why you just need to vote Labor. It does get confusing, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does. And by the way, this week, Meg O'Neill said that people who oppose the Northwest Shelf, A, are not serious about the environment, and B, are actually supporters of coal. So there you go.
Oh, wow. Thank you so much for letting us know, Meg. That makes complete sense. Yeah, you have no interest in this
Totally.
as Woodside CEO. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, okay, so that's a relevant backdrop, I guess, for the elections that are coming up. We've got WA state election on, is it the 8th of March? That's yes.
Right. Yeah.
So next week. And then the federal election soon afterwards, in, speculation that the federal government's kind of waiting for the state election to be out of the way before they then call for federal. I have been trying to get my head around, what the state of play is in WA, because I have to admit I'm one of those East Coast people who is like, what's happening over there? What's going on the other side of the country? So brief rundown of the state of play in WA Parliament right now. I have to say I did not realise Labor's majority in the lower house was so huge. It is, so they have 53 seats to the opposition's 6. Fucking wild. And is that basically just because the state election was 2021, coming off the back of COVID, and everyone loved Mark McGowan's response to that so much?
McGowan mania. People loved Mark McGowan. And I mean, look, we did pretty well in COVID. Like, we kind of had 5 days of lockdown or something, the whole thing. So I think that people appreciated that and liked that. So, I mean, Roger Cook's definitely still kind of riding on the coattails of McGowan. Interestingly, there was a poll in the paper recently that showed that Mark McGowan is still by far the most popular politician in WA, even though he retired quite a while ago now. And also, no one knows who Roger Cook is. Yeah, apparently his brand recognition is tiny. Well, I think in WA honestly, there are people in that boat too,
I had to be reminded. I was like, that's right, it's not actually Mark McGowan. What's this guy's name again? It's Roger Cook.
Yeah.
But Roger Cook is still, according to the polls, he's preferred premier over the Liberal leader, which is this Libby Metum.
I mean, the Libs are just in absolute disarray. I think that election result just kind of, they are fairly dysfunctional. Yeah. So, look, I think that there will definitely be a swing against Labor, but they'll pretty confidently form government again for sure.
Yeah, okay. That seems to be what the kind of general consensus is, that their vote might be down, but it's still ahead of the Liberals. And the Liberals, I gather that there's a bit of internal shit fighting happening there. There's this guy who is also the mayor of Perth, who is also running as a candidate, Basil Zempilas, who is kind of going after Libby Metum.
So Baz is a very interesting figure, and I think he kind of sums up a lot of WA. Some of your viewers, listeners might know him because he has done a lot of sports commentating for Channel 7 over the years. He's done Olympics commentating, footy commentating. He's worked for 7 West Media for a long time and still does. So he has a weekly column in the West Australian newspaper that he's written for years. He's been criticised a lot for using that as a political tool, first with the Lord Mayor staff and the Perth Council, but now he's running for the seat of Churchlands for the Libs. He's also kind of, made some fairly off-colour remarks over the years about trans people. He tried to shut down a women's shelter in the city of Perth. He's a fairly controversial kind of guy. But, he tried to roll Libby Metum a few months back with the kind of very active support of the West Australian newspaper, his employer. So, basically, I think Baz is kind of Kerry Stokes's man, but I think he's realised he's not going to be the leader of the party before the election. I think maybe he may have had aspirations to be, but I'd say he'd be one to watch after the election for sure. There's been a fair bit of kind of dysfunction there, I think.
So he is obviously quite conservative. Is that he is more to the right of the current Liberal leadership and their kind of positioning? Is that part of the problem, or is it really just
I think they're all pretty far to the right. I think what Baz has is just those kind of more direct connections. His wife Amy Zemplis works for Gina Reinhardt. His family's quite close to the Reinhardt family.
Right.
They're close to Kerry Stokes. So I mean, Basil is he's a great performer. He's a very kind of personable guy. I mean, a lot of people find him quite grating. But earlier this year, I saw Basil MC. I went along undercover to a conference organised by a bunch of right-wing think tanks, the Institute of Public Affairs and whatnot, and Baz was the MC. And he, at that conference on stage, announced that he wanted to ban social media for under 16s, and that kind of set off that whole thing, or at least it was the first mention that I heard of it. So
yeah, okay.
He's kind of able to see which way the wind's going. He's he's almost like a Trumpian operator. Like he's a media figure. He's got these kind of powerful connections. He's a bit of a performer. He's not really like a typical politician. So he's kind of the WA Trump in some ways, although he may bristle at that analogy, but who knows, maybe not.
Yeah, interesting. Okay, so that's the kind of lower house story and the premiership contest, I guess. And then the upper house, it's still Labor majority. They've got 21 to the opposition's 9, and then there's 6 on the crossbench, including 1 Green and a couple of independents, One Nation, and who am I missing? Someone else?
There's the Cannabis Party.
Oh, Cannabis, that's right. Yeah.
They had 2, now they've got 1. Yeah. So sorry, go on.
No, I think we were probably heading in the same direction, which is that there's been these electoral reforms that will probably have quite an impact on this next election because of a change to the way the upper house is constituted from having distinct regional seats, that they had 3 urban and 3 regional, and that effectively created this malapportionment where regional votes were worth significantly more than urban because most of the population live in the city, but now it's just one big state and 36, 37.
They've upped it to 37,
37, yeah. And so the Greens in particular are saying that this might enable them to get a bunch more MPs. They're saying they could elect up to 6 Greens to the Legislative Council and get balance of power. They're up to their current 1.
Yeah. So, Brad Pettit has been the sole WA Greens MP for the last kind of few years, which respect to him. That must be kind of quite difficult to be amongst all of that. And he's done a very good job, as Brad. But, he's hoping to get a few more mates in Parliament House. So I think it's you need about 2.8% of the vote to pick up 1 seat. So going off the numbers from the last federal election, I think that would enable the Greens to get like 4 or 5, which, may potentially give them the balance of power. So, the Greens, I think, are kind of like the big winners of that electoral reform.
Yeah. Which is funny because, this is and a teaser for an Inside the Greens bonus episode that we'll have coming out soon, but we were talking about the last attempt to reform WA's upper house, and the Greens were opposing the change because at the time, like traditionally, a lot of the Greens MPs had been from regional areas, and so some of them were like, well, this might fuck us over. But then the deal that they ended up with fucked them over even more and just benefited like the Nats and One Nation. And they were all like, oh, whoops, that was probably dumb. But now clearly this might actually have some benefit for them.
Yeah, and they've got, some great candidates. Sophie McNeil, former ABC Four Corners journalist. She's running for the upper house. Jess Beckerling formerly of the WA Forest Alliance. So they've got some, and others, really good candidates. So hopefully we'll get a little bit more Greens representation in the upper house. Brad can have someone to hang out with.
Some friends,
Yeah, and look, I think the Libs and Labor are going to vote together like almost all the time, because I think the other thing about WA Labor is they're like, they're basically a liberal party. They're so conservative. So, but I think hopefully there will be some concessions. I know that one of the things the Greens are pushing for is for them to shut down the Unit 18 unit within the adult prison where they're keeping the youth detention.
Is that Banksia Hill?
So Banksia Hill is the designated facility, but a couple of years ago they actually were having issues supposedly at Banksia, and so they set up this unit within Casuarina adult prison, which is kind of like horrific. And there was a young man who lost his life there a couple of years ago now. So that's something that like human rights orgs have just been saying for ages is totally unacceptable. So that's one thing hopefully that the Greens can have some impact on if they do manage to get that balance of power.
Yeah, I would hope so. The rest of the platform I was having a look that the WA Greens are running on is broadly similar to what they're kind of running on in federal and in other states. It's more social housing, rent freeze and cap, free public transport. I saw that did WA Labor do free public transport over summer? I read that in some article. I didn't even hear about that.
It was. That was pretty cool.
That's
free public
good.
transport and also free trips to the zoo was their other big cost of living measure. So I didn't take them up on that one. But
help me balance my budget. It's like rent, food, trips to the zoo. What can I do?
Yeah, those big ticket items. Yeah.
Yeah, that is cool though. They were also calling for price caps on 30 essential grocery items, which is something that the Queensland Greens did during our state election as well. And of course, significantly a ban on new gas and fracking in WA, and levying gas corporations and a fair transition plan, all of that sort of thing. I know they're also saying that they're hoping they can pick up a bunch of extra seats in the upper house. They're also running pretty hard in Fremantle. They won that. Yeah, they won it once at a by-election, right? And they're saying, well, this is the best shot we've had since then. That was 2009. They held it for like a few years and then lost it again.
Yeah, well, actually, that MP became an independent and left the Greens, so there was a bit of scandal and stuff there.
But there was an affair. She was having an affair with the treasurer.
With Troy Buswell, who's a very controversial figure in WA. I mean, look, I was but a boy at that point, so I don't really know the details of how that all went. But so I'm in Fremantle right now. This is my electorate, and it certainly has been interesting because there's a community independent candidate who's kind of in the mix now as well, a Teal candidate, Kate Hewlett. Felicity Townsend is the Greens candidate. So, it's interesting because, it's a Labor seat. So it's maybe not your kind of typical Teal situation. And the policy platforms of the two are very similar. So there's been kind of, some people are kind of, trying to keep the kind of progressives working together. And then there's also been a little bit of fracture around that.
Yeah.
But look, I think it's Fremantle's a bit of a weird place. It's a pretty tight-knit community. Like, I know both of them and they're both great, and I think they'd both be very good members of parliament. So hopefully they can knock off the sitting member, Simone McGurk, the Minister for Water. And the other thing that's happening in Freo is there's a massive the frack-free movement is huge. Like, down the street everywhere there's all these signs that say, I'm voting for an MP who will ban fracking. And we've got two options, two MPs who say, or two candidates who said they'll ban fracking. So I think that's pretty good.
Yeah, because there's obviously, this is, a big part of the critique of the Teals is that they may be socially progressive or good on climate, but quite often economically conservative. Do you know much about the Teal candidates' kind of politics in that regard?
Yeah, I do. I mean, I think Kate Hewlett, the Teal candidate, is probably cut from a slightly different cloth from your average Teal, and I think that probably represents the nature of the electorate. She's a photographer. She's had a shop in Fremantle for a long, long time. She's very well known, very involved in the art scene. I think, if she were to be elected, I imagine she'd vote like a Green. She doesn't kind of have the lib-coded Teal thing that, like, say, Kate Chaney up the road in Curtin, she definitely has.
Yeah.
But, Kate Hewlett is maybe slightly different. So, it'll be interesting to see how that one kind of unfolds. And I think, we spoke to Kate Hewlett on the Last Place on Earth podcast, and we said to her, like, why not the Greens? Why aren't you running with the Greens?
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. Yeah.
And she said that she really liked the kind of community independent model where it came from someone within the community representing what the community wanted. And I think in the case of Fremantle, what the community wants is basically the Greens platform. So
yes, it is kind of like okay. I mean, the Greens are also like a very, by definition, grassroots organisation. They have grassroots democratic pre-selections, and I've
been thinking about that. I think that's something the Greens need to, in WA at least, I don't know what it's like elsewhere, but lean into that a little bit more. Like, I think maybe in Queensland where you are, they do, right? That kind of grassroots democracy is a real focus. But
but probably people don't know. Like, it does. I have actually heard a few people talking about the fact that, like, what they like about the Teals, and this is really widely publicised about, Climate 200 and Community Independent, they're like, well, we held this big process to select a candidate with the community and everything. It's like, that's called a pre-selection. That's what the Greens do all the fucking time. But obviously we don't talk about like pre-selections as like a reason to vote for it. But maybe we should, promote that more as it is one of the 4 pillars, grassroots participatory democracy.
Yeah. And I think it does definitely have an appeal to people, and people kind of across the spectrum. And I think maybe increasingly so, given the kind of new political paradigm that we're seeing around the world. I think that, that connects.
Yeah. Well, I mean, speaking of new political paradigms, I saw that on your podcast you interviewed this guy, Austin Aussie Trump, previously formerly known as Ben Dawkins. He is a WA MLC, and he just changed his name to Aussie Trump, effectively, in what, a protest of the electoral reforms?
Yeah, he said it was a protest of the electoral reforms, the lack of regional representation now, and also they've made it much harder for independents to run.
So he's an independent, I assume.
So he's got a checkered political past. So he came to the parliament as a Labor upper house member, but he never sat as a Labor upper house member because just before he was about to be sworn in, it came to light that he'd been found guilty of breaching a family violence restraining order quite a number of times.
Oh.
So luckily Labor had this big majority, right? So whatever, they can just kind of they can get rid of him. He then went to One Nation.
Oh.
He was kicked out of One Nation for a lack of professionalism.
Wow.
So, yeah.
What is that line? Yeah.
Yeah. There were kind of questions around his work ethic, I believe, that were kind of leveled publicly.
Although, I mean, I would not trust the One Nation party line. That's the thing. Whenever One Nation disendorses a candidate and they're like, this is the reason. And actually it's because, for example, in Queensland, the guy that got dropped from One Nation or parted ways with One Nation didn't want to use, what's his name, James Ashby's printing company to print a bunch more materials for his, One Nation's so fucking dodgy. I'm like, I don't trust them. I don't think I trust this guy either, but who knows what was actually going on.
Who knows? Yeah. So Aussie Trump is now, sitting as an independent, running for re-election as an independent. I think, we tried to get to the bottom of why is changing your name to Aussie Trump an appropriate protest for these electoral reforms. I don't know if he quite was able to answer that one, but
so he's like, to prove, that's right. If you do follow through on that argument, you're like, well, if and when I get re-elected, it will be not valid, it will be illegitimate and unjustified because it was so easy for me to get re-elected on this, under this new system. That doesn't quite work. Obviously, it's a stunt where he wants to put Trump on the ballot and capitalize on pro-Trump sentiment that he thinks exists.
I mean, it's a pretty clever stunt, really. I mean, I don't know how he'll go. He's grouped with a number of other independents. He's third on the ticket, so I kind of doubt it. Okay. But, I'm sure there'll be a few people who just walk in and think, oh, yeah, I'll vote for Aussie Trump. So,
yeah. Do you think that this is a conversation I've been having with a lot of people in the context of the federal election and just looking at what's happening in the states? Certainly, I do think there is a growing urban and regional divide, and Trumpism is one of the factors or one of the elements of that. Where if you talk to people in the city, just everyone, even Liberal voters, I would say, are like, "Yep, I'm scared of what's happening in the US. I don't like Trump. I think that's crazy. I hate it." But presumably in the regions there is some of that, well, we need a strong man. We need someone who's different to other politicians. I like Trump. I like what he's doing. Do you think that it will be a factor in the federal election and in WA, I guess, specifically?
I think maybe not so much in WA because there's just, aside from Aussie Trump, there's not really anyone who's really trying to ride that energy. I think federally it might make more of a difference. I just don't think Dutton has the charisma to be Trump. He kind of he can be kind of menacing, but he can't be kind of funny like Trump can. So
yeah, that's right. See, Trump is that combination of evil and funny, whereas Dutton is kind of just evil.
Dutton's just evil and scary. I just don't think he has the Trump factor. But I do think your point is kind of interesting and right about that regional divide. And even just thinking of Aussie Trump, he's a member for Southwest, where I actually grew up, regional area. Down there, that was an absolute hotbed of anti-vax stuff during the pandemic, hugely. There's now been this big kind of public campaign against offshore wind development that they want to put in down there. Aussie Trump has capitalised on both of those things, as has the Liberal Party in WA. They've tried to capitalise on the anti-wind farm sentiment. So, I do think there is kind of a right-wing, post-truth, Trumpish politics that is maybe has more resonance in the regions than it does in urban areas for sure.
Is that this guy's politics? Is that Aussie Trump's politics or not?
Yeah, so Aussie Trump, it's classic because he was he was pre-selected during the McGowan era, and then on our podcast he was talking about the tyranny of the McGowan government during COVID and whatnot. So he's really kind of Yeah, he's really had quite the political transformation. But certainly, the wind farm stuff he was pretty engaged with and really tried to capitalise on. And that wind farm does seem to be in trouble now.
Yeah.
And I do think there were problems, like pretty big problems with the way they tried to roll that out and tried to consult and whatnot.
Yeah. Yeah. The wind farm,
having these big corporate interests as well. Like it's the same thing that's happened with fossil fuel projects. It's like these big multinational companies who come in and try and kind of like roll these communities and set up these big profitable things. Whereas I think if people had a bit more ownership and a bit more kind of buy-in and information, it would be easier for them to get on board with renewables. But it's a complex one.
It is definitely. Like I think particularly for the green movement, the environmental impacts of renewables is one that I keep coming back to as a very difficult dilemma right now, but something that I think that is where, the LNP has tried to capitalise on that, not so much as not in the open way that the further right wing is quite openly like renewables are bad for the environment, no wind farms, no solar, etc. But I think nuclear is the stand-in for that, right? Because Dutton's saying, well, nuclear is the more environmentally friendly alternative to coal and gas. So if you want an alternative, let's do nuclear, not wind and solar farms.
Yeah. You can see how that cuts through to a certain degree. So I think that is a big challenge to show that that is not a realistic plan. Yeah. Yeah.
Just quickly, I know Aussie Trump, when he's saying, this is a protest for the electoral reforms, and you were saying that it's about 2-point-something%.
Yeah, 2.7.
Yeah, which sounds quite low. Like I can see the argument then, or the line that's being rolled out is these reforms are unfair. You only need this tiny quota, tiny percentage of the vote in order to get someone elected. But that's the point is that that's as a percentage of the whole state, right? Whereas previously you could get elected on a really small number of votes under the former system.
Yeah, there's a guy in the upper house currently, Wilson Tucker. He's a really nice guy. He got elected in the Kimberley region on behalf of the Daylight Savings Party. And the Kimberley region has always had the lowest vote in the Daylight Savings referendums that they've had. So that was kind of a funny one. He got like 90-something votes, but because of preference deals and because of the way that it all worked, he found himself in the parliament. He was working in Seattle as a software engineer at the time, and he came back to WA to go.
Oh my God, he's like, fuck.
But to be fair to Wilson, he's actually done a really great job. He's been a really strong advocate on housing, and he's worked a bit with Brad Pettit, the Green representative, on various issues. So Wilson was one of the good ones, but you can see how that system could lead to all kinds of outcomes.
Yeah, okay. And so my understanding is then like that kind of thing happens. You come back after the 2021 election and McGowan government's like, let's take a look at this. They do election review and recommend the changes. Yeah.
Yeah, and supposedly they'd wanted to do it for a long time, I think, Labor. So, I mean, look, I think the changes are probably on the surface good. One thing that's not so good is that they've really increased the cost to run as an independent or as a small party. I know that like Socialist Alliance got priced out this time round. They normally will run candidates. So that seems
that doesn't
kind
seem
of
like a good thing.
Counter-democratic. Yeah. So there were a lot of reforms. I think some of them were probably good, some of them were probably bad. But it'd be great if we can get some more Greens in.
It would. So what are the other, it's being presented very much as all the elections are, as a cost of living election. And then there's in seats like Fremantle, there's the concern about climate. Are there, I have to say though, I haven't seen any big policy pitches from either party. Is it one of those ones where they're kind of just it's just vibes based? It's not vote for us for X thing?
Totally. And also there's very few vibes. So there's not much buzz really around this election. I think that everyone knows that Labor are kind of going to come back in. The way that the election cycle works here as well is it's always, I think, the first weekend in March. And so that creates this really short election campaign because by the time everyone's done with Christmas and that whole period, it's kind of happens without anyone really noticing. So I don't think definitely benefits the incumbents. Yeah, those fixed terms. And I think as well, maybe the federal election is a bit more interesting to people, and that's kind of taken some of the shine away from this. But
I think so. Yeah, quite possibly.
Yeah.
Like they would be saving. Yeah, they almost don't want to draw attention in a way from federal. I can imagine.
I think so.
Yeah. What impact do you think, if any, like will the WA result have on the federal election?
I mean, I think don't know if necessarily the result will have much impact, but I do think that what happens in WA is fairly significant. I think that, Labor federally supposedly kind of won off the back of WA last time around. And so they're really anxious about kind of keeping those votes. Both Albanese and Dutton seem to come to Perth like every other week, like they're here all the time.
Interesting.
So I think both of them are really trying to prioritise WA. I think also there's this narrative which has been to some degree manufactured by the media, which is that you win votes in WA by giving industry what they want, that people in WA don't want the nature laws and that people in WA want these gas projects approved. And I actually just don't think that really matches up with reality. Like I think that's kind of something that has been fairly intentionally manufactured by the Stokes media, the Murdoch media. And so, I think that like the nature laws is a pretty good example, I think, where you basically have Roger Cook bragging that he made a phone call that killed the nature laws. Like it's fairly kind of brazen, I think, that they're kind of throwing around their influence and their weight.
Yeah.
So, I think that they're trying to appease WA, and in the minds of federal politicians, that means appeasing the resources industry.
Yeah. I mean, it's very similar to, I would say, to Queensland. Like it's that same angle that, yes, we're a resources state, we're a mining state, and there are a lot of jobs tied up in the mining industry, and that means that, yes, if you want to win this, like Queensland's seen as a bellwether state, maybe WA kind of is in a similar way, or in terms of oversight influence on federal politics, that, then you have to appease the mining industry. But do you think that, like, and I'm particularly curious in those regional areas and in towns and communities that are reliant on gas, like, are they looking for the next thing, or is the mind frame kind of, no, we've got a good thing going here, we need to keep it going,
I mean, the really interesting thing about gas is that gas is actually a very small employer in WA. By sector, it's the smallest employer. Like there are more people working in the arts than there are working in oil and gas. So I don't think necessarily there are, like the economy is not actually that reliant on gas because, they don't pay royalties, the profits go overseas, they don't pay proper taxes. What the politicians try and do all the time is they try and kind of conflate iron ore and gas because iron ore is a big employer. Iron ore does pay a lot of royalties. Iron ore does kind of, contribute to the economy. So they intentionally kind of bring those things together and they see a tax on the gas industry as a tax on the iron
resources.
Ore, the resources industry. I mean, there's obviously issues with the iron ore industry as well. Particularly in terms of cultural heritage. But it's a pretty different situation to the gas industry, which really is giving back like nothing to WA effectively.
I mean, it's so, again, like I see parallels in Queensland where even though arguably now, yes, we should be looking to transition away from metallurgical as well as thermal coal, but for a long time, thermal coal was not the main contributor to jobs or to royalty revenue and export revenue in Queensland. It was metallurgical coal. And so, but they were conflated by those who want to argue that people who are pushing to close down or stop approving new thermal coal are going after this massive industry and this massive contributor to the economy, when wasn't really the case. And more broadly, you're right, it's the full resources industry, which includes a whole lot of minerals and other resources that may also have environmental impacts as mining does, but will also be needed for things like renewable energy manufacturing and are not something that the Greens are opposing. In fact, they're saying expand it, but that's all lumped in. And you hear, so the amount of times that I hear, well, the Greens want to ban all mining, and it's like simply not the case. So it is frustrating.
Yeah.
The question is, how far is the climate protest movement willing to go to achieve their goals?
And do you see the act of breaking the law, civil disobedience, as a last resort?
I hope it's the last resort, because the only other thing after this is violence. Extinction Rebellion are not supporters of violence. They are firmly non-violent. But I think other protest groups will emerge that will use violence out of desperation.
Is it something you'd be willing to do?
Who can say? I don't think so. I hope not. But I'm only human.
Well, I think we're probably almost out of time. We do a call to action every week, though, so I wanted to throw over to you for people who are listening at home, whether they're in WA or maybe the rest of the country. What can they do to, help take on the gas lobby and make a difference at the moment?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think if you're in WA, in case you didn't realise, there are 2 elections coming up pretty soon. So there's plenty to be done there. So I'd say kind of pick your favourite local progressive candidate and help them out with some door knocks. I know that the Greens are definitely looking for people to be on polling booths, both before Election Day and on Election Day. So that's definitely something that people can do. If you're over east, would love people to go and check out the Friends of Australian Rock Art, who've been fighting for the Murujuga Rock Art for some time now. I mean, of course, backing traditional custodians who've been fighting for it for a long time, been custodians of that place for a long time. So Friends of Australian Rock Art have a billboard up in Sydney at the moment on King Street. Some of your listeners might have seen it there. They're crowdfunding to keep that advertising campaign going and to get that as a kind of issue that people in the eastern states know about, because like Murujuga is the most amazing place. Like it's nominated for World Heritage listing. It should be a renowned place that people from all over the world come and see. Incredibly sacred place, but there's a big gas facility on top of it, and so it doesn't kind of get that recognition and I think that kind of widespread understanding that it deserves. So head to www.fara.com.au, FARA.
We'll put the link in our show notes too, so people can go and check that out. Yeah,
sweet. They've got an online action where you can email Albo and Plibisec and tell them that it needs to be protected, that we can't have 50 more years of industrial pollution on a World Heritage nominated site. It's crazy.
Here, it is, absolutely. People can also check out your online media outlet, Last Place on Earth. We'll put the link to that in the show notes. Is that the best place to find you? Where else can people find you and follow your work?
Yeah, probably lastplaceonearth.com.au. And we're on Instagram and TikTok, last.place.on.earth and Big State as well, which the handle is, I think, at Big State. But I don't know. You can put it in the show notes. I think if you search Big State, it does come up. Awesome. Yeah. Thanks so much for coming on the show and for all the work that you are doing. Really appreciate it. No worries. Thank you. And what you guys do is really cool as well. I think it's great. You guys have kind of been a little bit ahead of the curve, I think, with the kind of new media thing. Like they're saying this could be the podcast election or whatever, but I mean, I think all elections are podcast elections now. But
yeah, that's right. Serious Danger was the first podcast. You heard it here first.
But you guys have been doing this for a while, right? So it's cool.
A little while, yeah. I mean, they're following in the footsteps of many other great new media organisations, obviously. But I appreciate that. If you agree with Maz and you think this show is great, please leave us a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts. That helps get the word out about the show. But otherwise, you can find us at Serious Danger AU on all the social media. And good luck for the next time that a show comes out. The WA election will have happened, so we'll be able to pick apart all the predictions and chat that we had in this episode and see how right or wrong we were.
Cool. Sounds good. Look forward to hearing it. Yeah.
Thanks, mate. Bye.
Cheers.
Serious Danger Australia.